Hey everyone, Sassy Mouse here, and this is the 5th video in my road trip series. By this point, your vehicle should be ready to go, you should have a well-stocked safety kit, your bags should be packed, and you should have a clear plan for your trip. If you missed any of these videos or need a refresher, check the iCard in the corner or the links in the description. In this video, we will finally be hitting the road and covering some tips and tricks to make your trip the best trip it can be. So get ready to pick some trip tips and tricks that will stick like a pick in a thick whip dip. I hope you like that. That was a little bit difficult to do, and it took a little bit to figure out because it's kind of ridiculous. It makes no sense. But here's the video. Alright, now that you've done all of your planning and packing, it's time to actually hit the road. There are some tips that can make your actual road life a lot easier as well. First off, don't speed too much. You might be a speed demon at home, in which case you should think about that too, but that's a whole different story than speeding on a road trip. Getting pulled over and getting a speeding ticket far from home adds a whole extra level of stress and expense, and it can just ruin your whole trip. If you commonly contest your tickets, how are you going to contest a ticket that's out of state or away from home? You're not. It's going to be too difficult and you're just not going to do it. So you're going to end up having to pay the ticket, which is going to add to the cost of your trip, and you're going to be thinking about that ticket the entire time you're gone. Point is, it's best just not to speed in the first place. A good rule of thumb is to keep your speed within 10 miles of the speed limit, although going at or below the speed limit is always going to be the safest option, and has the bonus of making you get better gas mileage. As someone who has a really terribly gas mileage car, this is a very important thing to do. Although this is also helpful if you have a car that gets better and more normal amounts of gas mileage. When I'm road tripping, because the roads are a little bit faster, I'm going consistent speeds, I'm not engine cycling my engine as much, and I stay at or below the speed limit, I frequently get 3, possibly even 4 miles per gallon more than I get at home. At home, I generally get about 13 miles per gallon in this van. On a road trip, I can get between 16 and 18. That's a lot more. It makes my life a lot easier if I just don't speed in this car. Point is, going slower will save you money and save you money. I know that going slower will make it take a tiny bit longer to get where you're going. But, and this is a big but, it's better to get there at that time without having to spend the time talking to a cop because you didn't realize there was one and you got pulled over and now you have a ticket and have to pay a whole bunch more money. To reiterate, just don't speed out too much. Additionally, slowing down reduces your stress of having to interact with other traffic. When you speed, you have to worry about constantly weaving in and out of other cars, and you worry about people cutting you off because, well, your time to stop has decreased significantly. If you slow down, you can kind of just get settled in a lane, and if you have cruise control, which you're lucky bastard, you can just put on cruise control and kind of stay there, and mostly just focus on not having cars cut in front of you or run into you. It takes a lot of the stress of thinking off of your mind and makes your whole driving experience a lot less stressful. Trust me, it's a lot better. Speaking of gas mileage, you may also want to gas up a little bit more regularly than you normally do. I know, this doesn't actually help with gas mileage, but not everywhere has gas stations as frequently as you might be used to. There are some sections of the drive from where I live down to Nevada that have, well, they don't have gas stations for several hundreds of miles. Fun. Generally, a good rule of thumb is to fill up your gas tank when it gets to about a quarter tank. This will ensure that you have enough gas to get where you need to go, and if you start thinking about gas at a quarter tank, it gives you many more miles to actually find a gas station than if you wait until it hits E. Yes, you'll be carrying more weight, and yes, that will technically affect your gas mileage, but it will make your drive a lot less stressful because you won't be worrying about getting to the next gas station. This may not always be an issue, especially, like I said, if you stick to major interstates or whatever the equivalent is where you live, but it can be a problem, and you want to not have to worry about it. Gassing up early also gives you the option to be a little bit more picky about what kind of gas you get, so you can get better quality gas than you might get at the random gas station in the middle of nowhere that has a crank gas station. I have actually been to gas stations that have cranks on their pump. Those still exist. I didn't trust the gas from them, but I was out of options. So learn from my mistakes. It can also be helpful to take regular breaks. Although you'll have to stop for gas, it can be helpful to stop more often than that, depending on what kind of car you have. Not all vehicles run through gas as quickly as others, meaning that some vehicles can go many hundreds of miles between fill-ups. This is awesome, great, cool, except that sitting in a chair for many miles can lead to your legs swelling up and can even lead to something called a DVT, or deep vein thrombosis. A deep vein thrombosis is when you get a clot in your lower legs because you're having less circulation, and when you do finally stand up, this clot can break through, go to your lungs, and lead to death. If you don't want to die, stop regularly, get out of your car, walk around a little bit, and get your blood pumping. It will both help avoid aches and pains, and it will make your life a lot more comfortable. It will also keep you alive, which is, generally something most people want to keep doing. Generally, if you've been sitting for more than a couple hours, you should really pull over and get up now. Although getting out of your car every hour is useful, I get it, sometimes you get in a rhythm and you don't really want to do that. Making sure that you stop to get gas regularly and eat food regularly can help get you in the rhythm of this without having to take too many extra stops along the way. Just make sure that every time your car parks, you get out and walk around a little bit. One of the things I love about road trips is the ability to have road wine, or whatever beverage of choice you're having. With my car fridge, I can even have chilled road wine. Awesome. But it's important to be aware of open bottle laws. Once you open your road wine or other beverage, it may not be legal for you to keep it where you were keeping it before. If you have a cooler in your passenger area of your car, having an open bottle in there is likely illegal. Although open bottle laws vary depending on where you're at, and in the United States they vary from state to state, it can be helpful to look up these laws for the places you'll be traveling through before you go there so you know the specifics. However, in most places the general rules are that you cannot have an open bottle of alcohol in the passenger areas of the car. That means definitely not in the front seat, but if the back seat is, a seat, that's also considered a passenger area. You certainly cannot have it in a glove box or really anything from the front seats forward, but in many cases you also can't have it from the back seats forward. Thus, one of the only safe places in a regular passenger car to have it is in the trunk. In many places there are exceptions for campers and RVs, allowing the alcohol to be in the living space. This brings up an interesting question though. In my vehicle, I am in a converted camper van. This car is not legally registered as an RV. It's still registered as a car. And my car fridge is behind the driver's seat. It was a convenient place to put it. It wasn't really there so that we could get to things easily, but the passenger can easily open the fridge and get something out of it. Does that mean I can keep my road wine in there, or does it not? Technically, the fridge is inside the living area, but the vehicle isn't legally registered as a RV or a camper, and it can be accessed from the front seat. Point is, the safest place for me to keep my road wine or whatever alcoholic beverage is actually not in the fridge, but somewhere deeper into the car, perhaps under the bed. Under the bed is the closest thing to a trunk I have in this vehicle, and I have most of the rest of my food under there, so that would be a pretty safe bet. But it's definitely something worth asking yourself, because depending on the setup of your car, that might complicate what you can do with your road wine or other alcoholic beverages. Remember that open container laws may also apply to marijuana. Generally, if you are carrying marijuana through other states, you'll want to be cognizant of where you're keeping it so as to not end up with Well, a DUI. Speaking of which, don't drive intoxicated. Remember what I said about speeding tickets being awful? Well, imagine getting a DUI. In many jurisdictions, DUIs are a complex and involved legal proceeding that requires physically showing up, potentially getting a drug assessment, agreeing potentially to treatment, and various other things that can really put a damper on your trip if you have to do them outside of your local area. You shouldn't drink and drive at home, but definitely don't drink and drive when you're out on a road trip. It's just a bad call. In fact, although I'm saying drinking and driving, really don't drive under the influence of any drug, of which alcohol is one. It's just not a good call, and DUIs can ruin your trip. Be aware that your car doesn't actually have to be moving for you to get a DUI either. If you were, say, parked, sitting in the driver's seat and drinking a alcoholic beverage, that could be considered a drinking and driving violation. This is something to be very careful about. In my vehicle, this is something I have to be very careful about as well, since the best places to hang out and eat dinner are actually in the front seat. It's essentially the living room to our vehicle. But I have to be careful not to bring alcoholic beverages up there, as that could be considered a DUI. Overall, be careful with what you're doing. You don't want to get in legal trouble, and you want to be on your very bestest, most adorable behavior while you're out on a trip. Remember all that stuff we downloaded onto your phone for you to listen to? Now's the time to use it. You want to listen to something stimulating to keep you awake and keep you from nodding off and crashing into the car in front of you. As someone who has nodded off and crashed into a Jersey barrier in the middle of the highway, don't do that. I ended up being okay. I didn't actually hit another car and I woke up immediately, but I quickly pulled over and took a multiple-hour nap after that because it was so scary. I didn't realize how tired I was, and I could have easily crashed into someone else. I am now much more careful about making sure that when I start to feel drowsy, I either do something to wake myself up, like eat something or change what I'm listening to, or I literally pull over and take a nap. There is no shame in taking naps, but you can help prevent this a lot of times by listening to something more stimulating than music, or anything that's like a list is generally going to put you to sleep. Therefore, if you're listening to things on YouTube or certain podcasts, make sure you have some variety so that you can change it to something more stimulating if you notice that you're starting to get drowsy. Drowsy driving can be as bad as drunk driving, and if you actually fall asleep, you can get in a pretty serious accident. This is not good, and you need to avoid this at all costs. Interestingly, listening to a podcast can also help you remember a certain part of your drives better. There are certain podcasts I listen to where when I re-listen to the podcast, I vividly remember the drive I was having while listening to it. It can make certain mundane parts of your trip be a little easier to remember later on. Although you might not want to remember these mundane parts, it is a part of the experience that might be interested in having part of the memory banks. You should consider driving through cities at odd hours. Sitting in traffic is something that you generally don't want to do on a road trip. Therefore, you should aim to go through cities at times when traffic is at a minimum, and definitely not during rush hour. Generally, this is going to be either before 6 a.m., between 10 and 3, or after 8 p.m. I will even stop and take a nap before I hit a major metropolitan area to try to sleep through rush hour traffic. This can help me feel more energized when I actually do start driving again, so I have a little more energy to go further. And, as a bonus, I avoid all the nasty traffic that would make my life miserable. Yay! This also makes experiencing these cities a lot more enjoyable, since you're not experiencing it 5 miles at a time. Alternatively, you could avoid cities altogether. One of the great things about knowing your route ahead of time is you can choose to take a route that is more scenic or avoid cities as much as possible. If your end destination is a city, you're not going to avoid that one, obviously, but you can work pretty hard to avoid most of the ones in between. On the trip I took down to Nevada, our end city was Las Vegas. On the way there, instead of taking I-5 down to California and then cutting across, we could cut out pretty much every major city in Oregon by heading east while in Washington, and then going to the east side of Oregon by Mount Hood, and finishing the rest of the drive on the desert side of Oregon and through Nevada. Most of this has very small towns and very minimal city areas, allowing us to avoid traffic regardless of what hours we went through. It also allowed us to experience more of the small town cutesy culture that you just wouldn't get if you go through a large city. Trust me, try going to a grocery store in some of these towns. The checkout people can be absolutely delightful, even if you don't really like interacting with people much. They're very friendly most of the time, and you can have some pretty fun conversations telling them what you're doing. Do you absolutely need to drive more distance than you think you can do on your own? Consider driving in shifts. So this is something me and my husband talk about every time we go on a road trip. And this last time we actually did a pretty good job of it. My husband did actually drive for a fair amount of the drive, but because he doesn't drive my vehicle as much, I often end up doing the bulk of the driving. However, if we could drive in perfect shifts, we could potentially double how much driving we could do in a day. If you can drive 6 hours and your partner could drive 6 hours, if your partner could sleep while you're driving and you could sleep while they're driving, you could potentially do 12 hours. However, and this is a big caveat, this is not something you can count on. This kind of driving is best for people who are planning to sleep in their car and don't have specific hotel plans for their final destination. In a situation like this, where I'm in a camper van, this works best because, well, if they can't actually do as much driving as I expected, it's not as big of a deal if we just don't make it as far as we had planned. If you are relying on that person to drive a certain amount, you should have some overlap in your actual drive times. This is because it's often very difficult for someone else to fall asleep while the adventure of a road trip is beginning. They're just not going to sleep the entire time you're driving. It's not going to happen. Therefore, if you can drive 6 hours and they can drive 6 hours, you should plan to drive 8 to 10 hours, not 12. This can allow you guys to both drive slightly less each, and it takes some of the stress and pain and energy of driving away from both of you so that you could have a more enjoyable ride. If each of you drives 4 to 5 hours, then each of you has some energy in the bank to enjoy whatever place you get to for that night. One thing I forgot to mention when recording this is that an additional driver over 2 may not be able to drive as long as you might expect. This is because they will likely be awake for much of the other driver's drives and will want to experience the road trip with their friends. This can significantly impact their energy levels when it is finally their turn to drive. As a result, they may drive for far fewer hours than the other drivers. This will depend on their driving stamina, of course, but generally, if 2 drivers can drive a total of 8 to 10 hours, a third driver may only raise your total driving time to 10 to 14 hours. Thus, if you are planning stops or hotels, do not anticipate that each driver will be able to put in 6 hours each, because you just might not make it to your planned stop or hotel. Remember how I mentioned tinting the windows? Another really helpful thing to do is to actually cover the windows up. There's a few different products you can get. There's some pre-manufactured universal things that cover the windows somewhat, or you can get a product called Reflectix. Not a sponsor, obviously. This is like a hardware store product. But you can get something called Reflectix and cut them to custom sizes to fit in your windows. You can cut them for every single window in your car, and this can help block out a lot of light, and bonus, it can hide the fact that you have a whole bunch of possessions in your car. Yay! Depending on what kind of car you have, if you're not putting all of your travel stuff in the trunk, the fact that you have a bunch of shit in your back seat can be a red flag that your car would be great to break into and steal shit from. Thus, putting actual coverings on the windows can keep people from looking in and finding this out. I'll admit, Reflectix looks a little weird, and I look like a weirdo every time I put it on my windows, but it helps add a significant amount of privacy, and it allows me to not worry about people looking in and realizing that, well, I have a whole camper in here, and there's a lot of stuff I leave in here all the time. Stuff that is kind of expensive and could definitely be sold if someone wanted to be an asshole. Thus, I like to leave my vehicle in a way where people can't look in. This also is a bonus if you're planning to sleep in your car or you have to sleep in your car, because it blocks out some of the light that would normally get inside. Although covering the windows is not always a perfect system for security, it does help. In addition to covering the windows, you should also hide your valuables. Particularly valuable things like your ID and money should be brought with you everywhere. Everywhere. Are you stopping to go pee? Bring your valuables with you. I know a lot of rest stops don't necessarily have good places to put all of that stuff, but you should try to figure it out, because having someone steal your ID and all of your money can ruin your day and your trip and your month and potentially even your year. It's no fun. For any other valuables in your car, you should make sure that they're hidden as much as possible so that your car either looks like it's full of junk, you cover up all the windows so they can't see in, but even if they did break in, they couldn't find your valuables as easily, or it just keeps it from looking as enticing. If you're bringing things like game systems or a laptop, make sure those are hidden as best as you can so that they really just can't be found and stolen. You don't want your stuff stolen. That's no fun. You should also consider what to do with your prescription medications. I bring my prescriptions with me everywhere, just like my wallet and my money, because if I were to lose them, I would get very, very sick without them. Depending on what kind of medication you have, this could be a concern for you as well, and you should definitely consider having your medications with you at all times. If you don't bring them with you, however, you should make sure that they're well hidden within your car. While on the road, you should also consider eating healthy, at least once a day. Traveling is hard on the body, and many people experience getting diarrhea or constipation while on a road trip. This can be exacerbated by the fact that most road trip food is going to be, drive-through food. And drive-through food is generally meat and carbs. Meat and carbs is okay, but it doesn't have a whole lot of fiber to help you digest properly. Therefore, bringing at least one healthy meal per day can help keep your system, flowing a little easier. It'll make it so that you don't end up with significant cramps, running to the bathroom constantly, or feeling like you're full of shit. Ideally, consider eating something with fruit and or fiber in it, as this is often missing from road meals. If you have a car fridge, it's fairly easy to bring this stuff with you, but you can do it with just a cooler as well. Just be a little bit more careful about what you bring. This is the end of the 5th video in my road trip series. If you missed the previous videos, check out the iCard in the top right corner. In the next video, we will be covering tips for people who like to stay in hotels. If you are someone who likes to sleep in your vehicle, don't worry, that video will be coming out soon. To be notified when these videos come out, vroom vroom the subscribe pedal and beep beep the bell icon to get actual notifications, because YouTube decided subscribing just was not enough. Until next time, stay safer out there.